I'm Angela Kelly Robeck, host of the Empowered Principal Podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hey, welcome back. Steve here, and today I'm talking with Jeremy S. Adams. That's right, he's back. And just as a note, he's a high school and university teacher in Bakersfield, California. He's a prolific writer, the author of 4 books, the most recent, Hollowed Out, A Warning About America's Next Generation, and he also submits articles for online journals like Quillette and is a column writer for thedailywire.com. So cool. What an awesome conversation we're going to have today about the current status of education in America and what we can do about it. You're just going to love this stuff. Great energy, lots to learn. Thanks for listening. And by the way, it'd be so cool. Could you share this with a friend, a family member, a colleague? Yeah. Say, hey, you ought to listen to Teaching Learning Leading K12. That would be so awesome if you did that. Thanks so much, and enjoy the show. The intro and outro were created and performed by Brian K. Buffington. You can find more about Brian at briankbuffington.com. And while you're there, don't forget to sign up for his newsletter. Thanks, Brian. Cool, huh?
It's the Education Podcast, your favorite show, with lots of groovy guests and they share what they know. So crank it up to 10 and let your neighbors know that here's another show with Dr. Steve Milletto. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12. With Dr. Steve Milletto.
Jeremy S. Adams is a high school and university teacher living in Bakersfield, California. He and his writing have appeared in the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, C-SPAN, the Sacramento Bee, and numerous national education podcasts, as well as some other cool stuff I'm going to tell you about at the end here. Mr. Adams has won numerous accolades for his teaching and writing efforts, including the 2014 California State Teacher of the Year Award, Daughters of the American Revolution. The 2012 Kern County Teacher of the Year Award, was a 2013 semi-finalist for the California Department of Education's California Teacher of the Year Award, and was a finalist in 2014 for the Carlston Family Foundation National Teacher Award. He was recognized in 2014 by the California State Senate for his achievements in education. He was a 2018 California State University Bakersfield, or CSUB, Hall of Fame inductee, the first classroom teacher ever inducted in the history of the school. Jeremy received his bachelor's degree in politics from Washington and Lee University and his master's degree in education, curriculum, and instruction from California State University, Bakersfield, where he was named the outstanding student in the School of Education. He is also an education speaker and has spoken to large education groups and conferences across the country. In addition, Jeremy is the author of Full Classrooms, Empty Selves, The Secrets of Timeless Teachers, Riding the Wave, Teacher Strategies for Navigating Change and Strengthening Key Relationships, and Hollowed Out, A Warning About America's Next Generation. By the way, Jeremy previously appeared on Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 episodes 123, 103, 300, and 399. And now here we are, and we're over 500. And so we're which is really cool. And so we're going to have him somewhere in the early 500s, which is very nice. And I appreciate him supporting the podcast like this, and I appreciate all the stuff he writes. He does an awesome job. Jeremy is also now a weekly columnist for thedailywire.com. To give you an idea, 2 of his recent articles are We Must Make Teaching an Attractive Profession Again, and How Progressives Have Ruined School Culture and Created a Mass Teacher Exodus. Jeremy, it's awesome to talk to you again. Thanks for joining me, and say hi to everyone.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me on. I got to say, my biography is now so long. It's exhausting just to hear the biography, much less live it. So thank you so much for having me on again.
Oh, it's cool. You've done a lot of stuff, and it's great to have you back. And you've written a lot of really neat stuff. But before we go any further, the last time we talked, we were talking about Hollowed Out, a Warning About America's Next Generation, which is this 4th book that you wrote. And it was an Amazon best-selling book. I mean, you had some really strong success with it. And I believe that, before it had a hardback run, now it's getting ready to be released as a paperback, which is cool. Congrats to you that you've had a nice run. Could you share a little bit about the premise of Hollowed Out?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I do want to remind you that we actually taped a podcast for Hollowed Out, I think before it even came out. At the time, I was really, really nervous about it. It's my first quote unquote popular book. It wasn't meant to be a professional development book. It was meant to be a book of kind of popular commentary about our schools and our children. And it did fabulously well. Like you said, it was a an Amazon best-selling book, not in a little subcategory, but like overall on Amazon for I think 2 or 3 days at one point. And it's done very well. The paperback just came out about 2 weeks ago, and it's also doing very, very well now. And so, yeah, I'm a little shocked at how many copies it sold and how well it's done and how much attention it's received. So, yeah, thank you so much for helping me start the momentum of that. Steve, you definitely had a lot to do with it. But Hollowed Out was, I would call it my magnum opus. It was really kind of the book that I felt like I had been meant to write as a teacher and an educator. And essentially it was an argument and kind of a calling, saying to the kind of non-teachers of America, look, we have a profound and colossal problem with the young people who are now growing up. This is not just an old man, a curmudgeon, a crank howling into the wind, get off my lawn, you youngins are going to hell in a handbasket. It was the fact that there was something uniquely worrisome about our young people. And the thing is when you've taught as long as I have, Steve, I'm now in year 25, which I had some student last year say, well, that's like a quarter of a century. I don't know why you say it. I mean, that sounds worse. A quarter of a century sounds a lot worse than 25 years. But when you teach for 25 years, you notice when there's kind of a sudden pivot, a sudden change in the way our students are acting, the way they're thinking, their worldview, their value system. And right around 2013, 2014, things were really starting to get off track with our young people. The one thing I say to any critic, and I don't mean like, people who are mean, because people are mean, but somebody who has a real criticism is, the criticism is, every generation thinks the next one is off track. What I would say to you is that the young people who are in our classrooms today are the most unhappy generation in American history. When you look at their mental state, when you look at their loneliness, when you look at the levels of self-harm, when you look at the levels of isolation and suicide, and the word that we hear that is omnipresent and ubiquitous today is anxiety. Our young people are anxious all the time. The New York Times just did an article in the last few months about how, emergency rooms are overwhelmed with teenage girls who just don't know what to, they feel like they're on the verge of doing something bad. And these ER doctors don't know exactly what to make of it. So there is something uniquely worrisome about our young people and their unhappiness. And the book is an argument and an explanation about why that's happening. And what I'm trying to argue is that, the things that we typically attach to in life that give it purpose and meaning, things like family, things like friendship, things like faith, things like patriotism, things like learning. These are kind of the connective tissue between the human soul and higher meaning and purpose. And our young people don't have those kinds of connections today. They're literally being hollowed out of the connective tissue that really brings us joy and happiness as creatures on this wonderful planet. And I explore that and explain it and really try and get people who are not teachers to understand what's happening and why.
That's awesome. And I've read it. It's a great book. It makes those points, and it really explains a lot about, we have this ability to be connected all over the world, yet we're lonely.
Yeah.
And not only lonely, but we isolate ourselves.
Yeah. And one of the things that you see happening is with young people, people think sometimes that loneliness means that there's nobody around you, but that's not true. Loneliness is when you feel like you're not participating in meaningful activities with other people. So, I see this all the time. And one of the things in some of the interviews I've done for Hollowed Out, some of the hosts are shocked by this, and yet teachers understand it. You will go to a teenage gathering, like a party or something, a birthday party, and you walk in to pick up your child or something, and it's silent because everybody's sitting around on their phone staring at it. That's what's creating loneliness. When it used to be earlier in my career, if you ended a high school classroom, a minute or two early, and you said, okay, kids, you guys can just talk for a minute. They would just erupt. They put their notebooks away and just, chatter and gossip and flirt and whatever. Now, when you say, okay, there's 2 minutes left, take it easy, silence. Nobody talks, nobody engages, nobody tries to gossip or anything like that. Just take out their phones and they start to scroll. And that's it. And enough of that, and you feel lonely.
Yeah, that would be, that really would make it feel that way. It's funny because I went to the movies this weekend, and, some young couple, they sat, but it was funny. It's one of those things where you can choose your seats ahead of time. And I on purpose found a good seat because I was by myself. It was a neat weekend. Everything was $3, all the tickets, and it's like, cool. So I saw a really current, up-to-date movie. I saw Jaws on IMAX.
Oh, wow.
Which is awesome. And in IMAX. But what was funny was this young couple, they buy the 2 seats between myself and the next couple over, and they plop down in there. And if this young man was trying to impress her, it just, all I know is that she spent like most of the time on her phone. She's looking at the phone and just whatever she was doing over there. And it's like, that's a strange date right there, because he was.
We see this with families too. Families, and I had to fight my own family on this. You go out to dinner, and everyone just take out their phone instead of sitting there and talking and catching up on their day. I mean, it really. I mean, I would tell you that kind of the totem that stands between kind of the old world and the new is the advent of these phones that they suck all of our attention. And I would say creativity and our ability to communicate. One of the things I've noticed with our kids lately, Steve, is they're not very good at conversation. So they don't like to meet you. Like, they don't look you in the eye. Sometimes I'll say to a student when they walk in, "Good morning." They don't reply. They don't even respond. It's like I'm not even there. And what I want to say is, that's rude. You're being rude. Stop being rude. I'm being nice to you. When I say good morning, you say, "Hello, Mr. Adams. How are you?" That's what I want to say. Sometimes I'm like, and I'll try to give good morning, and sometimes a second time, and then they'll say, "Oh, hello." But it is very, very frustrating because they don't know social norms. They don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to deal with other people, and it's and again, that's an important and enriching part of the human experience is knowing how to engage with one another. And it's, as a teacher, if you can't get kids to look you in the eye, if you can't get them to know that they're supposed to somehow respond to the stimuli that you're giving them, it's really hard to communicate education through that stimulation.
That's so powerful what you're talking about, because it really is. I mean, it's, you think about what a stand-up comedian does, and they have to be able to read the audience and so forth and stuff like this. It's really not that far from what a teacher does. When you're working with the kids and you have to be able to read who's getting and who's not getting, and if you're not getting nothing but like children of the corn type responses, ooh, okay.
Well, I mean, it's funny you say that, because you kind of have, and anybody who's listening to this podcast, who's a veteran teacher, you kind of have your, like, the stories that are funny that you can tell the kids always laugh at, right? You kind of have your tried and true, decades old, shtick. And I've noticed in the last year or two, they don't work. The kids don't laugh. They don't find it funny. And I'm like, well, have I stopped being funny? Maybe a little. Maybe I'm not as funny as I was when I was 35. But I think that, like, what they find to be funny, like, they'll try and show me a meme on their phone, and like, I won't get it. I'm like, I don't understand that. Like why is that funny? And I just think that there gets to be this kind of chasm separating the two sometimes. And I wish it wasn't the case, but like, people warned me. I remember, when I was younger, people are like, when you get to your 50s and you've raised children and you've had a career for 30 years, you've been married for 3 decades, and you've maybe gone through sicknesses and you've buried your parents, you've had all these, soulful, gut-wrenching, real experiences, it's hard for you to relate to a 14-year-old. Their level of experience and understanding is so different, it can be hard to relate. And I thought, no, I will always be able to make that connection. And I hope that I do. But it is different. There's no question about it. I don't know if I'm making any sense at all this morning.
Oh, you're making perfect sense, because that's one of those things that you just as a note, someone who lives off references. I don't know if you've noticed, I've already made a few of them to older pop culture. And, there's so many great pop culture references that now have no meaning to many of them. And
they have no idea. I mean, like, in the last few weeks, like I mentioned Magic Johnson. They have no idea who Magic Johnson is. They kind of know who Britney Spears is because of the Free Britney movement, right. But like, but there's just weird things, Steve. Like, I know we're kind of going in a direction we probably didn't mean to go, but like little things I've noticed, like, well, 2 big ones. Number one is they've admitted that they don't like to really watch movies all that much because they don't have the attention span for it, gotcha. Which, movies are such I love movies. I mean, they're such a, kind of a source and origin of joy in life, or movies. And I can't imagine, you don't have the attention span for it. But the other thing that really, kind of upsets me a little bit when they talk about kind of the differences is that a lot of them will admit that they don't read at all. I mean, it's just they say they can't focus on it, and it's just nothing that they have trouble understanding. So yeah, kind of the literacy, the lack of attention, all of that is something that really kind of worries me a lot. I write about a bit of it in the book, actually, especially about the reading.
Well, I think that's, and a big part of what we're talking about so fits, and especially coming back to your book, is that, it's a lot of the educational professionals that are sticking around, that are staying, that aren't running away, are really trying to deal with this. And you're hitting the nail on the head with all this stuff, because they're talking to young people who are like just really not on this. I mean, I was a high school teacher, and all my administration was all through high school, and as opposed to elementary. And, one of the things that you really kind of, if you really doing what you need to do, you're connecting with the kids. But if they're putting up walls that stop you from connecting, it makes it very rough.
Well, and it's like, one of the things that really shocked me in the last year, my best friend in the world is a teacher I teach with too. And we've noticed the same thing, is that it's one thing, if you get caught doing something and you shouldn't do it, right? Like, oh, okay, yeah, you caught me. I was cheating on a test, or, I was passing notes in a class or whatever. But what's weird now is that the students will straight up say, I should be able to be on my phone in the middle of class. I should be able to have the earbuds in. You're like, what do you mean you should be able to? You're supposed to be paying attention to me. Yeah, but I should be able to have my phone too. Right? Well, I mean, why can't I have my phone? Because to them, I don't know if you saw this, but there was an article, I think in The Guardian over in Europe, where our friends at Netflix noticed that on a lot of teenage shows, all the subtitles were being used. And they were like, oh, this is awesome. The teenagers are reading now. No. What they realized is that the kids wanted to be on their phones as the show was running, and they just wanted to look quickly at the screen, read the dialogue so they didn't miss out, and go right back to their phones. Right. And so you have that same kind of urge and desire in the classroom. They want to kind of be on their phones and kind of vaguely paying attention. They have their earbuds in, and it's weird. You almost have to. It used to be like, put your phone away. Like, okay, I understand. Now it's like, well, why? Why do I need to put my phone away? Why do I need to take this out of my ear? And of course, I'm like, because I want your attention 100%. I'm greedy. That's my new expression. I'm greedy for your attention. You're not going to learn about the Federalist anti-Federalist debate. You're not going to understand the unitary theory of the executive. You're not going to understand any of these important concepts if you are perpetually, manically, unendingly, ubiquitously distracted. So put your phone away and pay attention. And that's my new expression. I'm greedy for your attention. That's why, kiddos. That's why.
First of all, I hate that you have to say that, but I love what you're saying, because that's good stuff. Yeah, I'm a huge baseball fan. I was at a game this last week, and I'm looking around me, and it's literally, because I'm getting all into it. I get reminded by my wife and others that are in my family that the Braves don't pay me, nor do they care about my real opinion from the stands, nor can they hear me. But I still express my opinions from the stands. But when you look around, most of the young people are on their phones, and it's like, why are you here? And if you look over their shoulder at what they're texting each other, it must be really important, right? Hey, how you doing? I'm good. What are you doing? Nothing. It's like, this is what you're, you don't even know that it's what's going on in the game. Anyway, it's just, it's right on the same planet. So this is wild. And what you're talking about has a lot to do with, I mean, there's just such a different attitude about this. When I was an assistant principal, I spent a lot of my time in a school where, you weren't allowed to text, you weren't allowed to use your phones and stuff like this. And it's funny, I spent a lot of time making sure that enforce that rule. Boy, it'd be like a full-time job and a half today if they did that.
Well, I just finished. I was really excited to do this at the Daily Wire. They asked me to do a series, 5 ideas to fix American education. And what I'll say is kind of the good news is I do think that teachers, even the young teachers, are coming to the conclusion that we've got to take care of the phones. So you've got to put them away during class. This idea that you can kind of somehow manage, I think a lot of people believe, well, you can use them. They can be your ally, don't be a fuddy-duddy, somehow, integrate them into curriculum. And I think most of us are now of the opinion, no, they've got to go away. Like, just put them in your backpack, turn them off. If it's ever an emergency, absolutely, you have it, whatever. But I do think there's a consensus that they have to go away. They have to go away. And again, it's not that they're not going to hurt you. I mean, one of the other things I've noticed, of course, is that it takes forever for them to do homework, forever. And their reading scores, I mean, their literacy levels are at all-time lows. That's another article I wrote in this series of How to Fix Education is, our children are so far behind in literacy now. I mean, you want to talk about a crisis that nobody's writing or talking much about, and yet it is a great predictor for future educational attainment, incarceration, and income levels. Kids who can't read by the time they're in the third grade, that trajectory almost never looks good. And it's something we don't talk about all that often.
That's so powerful. I read that article, and now it's cool to know that that's a series, because I was reading each of the articles, because I was like, boy, we could do a separate show on almost every one of these articles. So, and don't worry, but now
I keep waiting. I keep waiting for all these famous people, the Daily Wire, to have me on their show. It hasn't happened yet. I don't know what's going on.
Oh man, what are they waiting for, man?
I don't know. I keep waiting.
Because you've written some awesome stuff there, and one of the things that one of those that we gotta talk about while we got some time is that one of your articles is we must make teaching an attractive profession again, and I was wondering what your thoughts are about that. I've read your article, and let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of an extension of the fact that that there are a lot of people who are leaving the profession today. But I think really the gold standard of really kind of the disease of the profession is that you have the public which says, I admire teachers, but I don't want my kid doing it. And I think what's interesting is I think most people think that when teachers are angry or upset, they're like, well, we don't get paid enough, our pension isn't enough. And I think, in California, I think we do pretty well. I think there's some states where it's criminal, right? So I don't think, how low they get paid. So I don't think you can make a broad nationwide statement about things like that. What teachers are frustrated now are working conditions. I totally relate to those people in Ohio who went on strike because they don't have air conditioning. We're talking about student behavior and the fact that I think, when you ask teachers, why are you frustrated? The number one thing you hear is essentially just our plates are so piled up with things to do, and every single failure of society seems to kind of be rolled up and put onto our plates at school. We're supposed to be counselors now. We're supposed to be therapists. We're supposed to be friends. We're supposed to be parents. We're supposed to provide meals. We're supposed to provide counseling. We're supposed to do all of this stuff now. And of course, if we can at schools, let's do it. I mean, where else are we going to? It makes sense. But I do think that it adds to this sense that, our students are so overwhelmed. There's so much anxiety and poverty and violence in their backgrounds for many of them. That education becomes almost the third or fourth thing we do, and most of us didn't go into the classroom to do that. We went into the classroom because we believe in the power and the potential and the magic of the classroom. We believe in its transformative effect. We love a subject, or we like to be around young people. I mean, whatever the reason we went in, this was not it. And of course, one of the things I like to argue in my articles and some of my speeches is I want the public to understand that all of these anxieties and these concerns that teachers have, these were around before COVID, okay? COVID didn't cause this stuff. COVID punctuated it. COVID accelerated and amplified it and put an exclamation point on it, right? But these things were there beforehand. But I think that kind of pull that says, we still admire our schools overall, but we don't want our own children to do it, really shows you that the public is starting to understand how hard it is to teach. And like I said, it's more about working conditions and the behavior of the students than it is things like pay.
That's so powerful what you're talking about, because it becomes so apparent. And the more that, because you're right. I mean, I got to tell you, when I was a teacher, you had to spend time with kids, talking with them. You were, one of the reasons why I became a teacher was because I wanted to make history fun, because for me, history was fun, but my classes were not. and they were the exact opposite of fun and interesting and so forth. And so my goal was to try and make it fun. Well, when I became a teacher, then I discovered that there's so much more to do. But today there's a thought that we're going to like solve all their problems as a classroom teacher, and everything from poverty to whatever the issue is, and that we're supposed to understand that these, whatever is happening in their life stops them from being able to do what they should. Like, I've heard some podcasts I've listened to where the teachers have talked about how there's policies in the school that stop them from being able to, even just enforce, like you were talking about the stuff with the cell phone, the idea that, no, it's my time now. Well, I disagree with you, type of thing. Anyway.
Yeah, well, and just kind of to further that point, that's a great point. And this is kind of what my fifth article in the series, which I just submitted it. So it'll be published this week, I hope. Is a recognition, and it's an unhappy recognition. It's nothing that I celebrate, and I wish it weren't true. But I think at a certain point, we do have to, as educators, as teachers, as classroom romantics, whatever you want to call us, I do think at some point it's healthy to assume a posture of humility and to just look at the data and admit that at the end of the day, most of the things that decide whether or not a student succeeds or not really happens before they get to the classroom. I remember reading a statistic that said from the age of 5 to 18, a student only spends 9% of their time at school. The other 91% is at home or somewhere else. And so it's really hard to say that 9% decides everything. I mean, we know that a lot of the things that help a young person succeed, things like reading to them when they are an infant, right? Talking to them when they are an infant, having meals. I write about that in Hollowed Out a lot. That's gotten a lot of publicity. A lot of people are not aware about the death of the family meal, that a lot of families, even upper middle class families that have the means and the time, don't eat together anymore. Creating a college going culture, having books in the home, having expectations, checking in on homework, talking to teachers. All these things that make a difference are not things happening at school. They're happening before somebody gets to school. It's the culture that you come from. It's the family that you come from. It's the resources that a family provides for tutoring or whatever. If you're not doing well, a lot of these things are things that teachers can't control. So I think at a certain point, believing that we're going to be able to, kind of stand in their lives as these mighty correctives that can, override a violent background or, children who are dealing with extreme poverty and mental health issues, by all means, we should try our best. I mean, our absolute best to help these children. And I'm proud that our profession tries to do it. But the idea that we can overcome all of that single-handedly and that we're just one, pedagogic strategy away from doing it, I think is folly. And I think if we assume a posture of humility, it helps us to kind of pinpoint what we can and cannot fix.
That's very much so. I when you think about why most people went into teaching, and I'm not talking about people who kind of stumbled into it and like it or whatever, and I'm not talking about the ones who should have chosen something else.
Right.
But I'm talking about our colleagues who, they spend the time, they do this, they do that, they take their weekends, their summers, their winter holidays, whatever they do. Is all focused on trying to do things better and working with the kids and stuff like this. But then also on top of that, they're supposed to be held responsible for every aspect of the kid's life, whether they do well or not. The idea that they should be doing better. And in this, I think I think it's crazy considering that's not really what you have in your hands, the tool that you have. The work that comes out of that person happens because they care about helping the kid succeed, not because now you've turned them into a pseudo, child specialist in child psychology or something like this. And
right, exactly. I mean, I think sometimes, we're asking teachers to be counselors. We're not trained for that. I think sometimes you're asking us to be intervention specialists. Well, we're not really trained for that. And then sometimes you're kind of asking us to be kind of a friend and an act in loco parentis. And frankly, I don't think that's appropriate. And so I think it's kind of asking us to kind of be a jack of all trades. And I think somebody who said it well said, wouldn't it be nice if teachers just taught? And it would be nice. Now, we don't live in that world, and I don't think we're going to go back to it. But it would be kind of nice to a certain degree.
It really would be. And it's one of those things that, you think about what so many of them do. And it's crazy. I've got to say this because what we're talking about, let's go. You also write for a online, I think it's online entity that has done podcast stuff called Quillette, something like that.
Quillette. Yeah. I think it's called Quillette. Yeah.
Yeah. And you recently had an article. My late father was a great teacher. He wouldn't last a week in the modern classroom. And one of the things that's really, one of the things that you have that's cool is that you actually taught in the same school where your father taught. And actually you went to school there too, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Bakersfield High School. My dad taught there for 30 years. I was there as a student. And then after 4 years of college, I came right back as a teacher. So really, to a certain degree, 29 out of the last 33 years of my life, I've been there every day. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. And what's really cool is a story you told it in the past where if someone wanted to get the correct John Adams in the John Adams, I'm thinking history here, Jeremy Adams.
Right.
The correct Mr. Adams. There we go. That's the story I'm going for. They referred to you as the young one, or how did they refer to you?
Well, yeah, they would, it kind of for like 2 years, we had students in common. He taught English, I taught world history. And so, they called me young Adams or baby Adams behind my back. But my dad didn't like that because then he became old Adams. So he didn't particularly like that at all.
Sorry, I had to get to tell that story. That's awesome. So why do you think that, although we've kind of talked down that path a little bit, why do you think he wouldn't last a week in a modern classroom?
My dad was one of the best teachers in the history of this county, but he was very, what we would nowadays call old school, and he brought a seriousness and a standard to the classroom that you're not really allowed to bring anymore, if I'm being perfectly frank with you. There was no chewing of gum. You took your hat off. You don't eat in my class. And he, he had a very different view of things. Like nowadays, like the best example I can give you is, let's say a student is late to class every day, right? In my generation nowadays, I had a kid like this. He was very bright. He's like, you know what? Hey, my mom's a single mom. She has to leave early for work. I have to take my sister to school every day. And so I'm going to be 25 minutes late to your class every single day. And of course, my view was, I really wish this wasn't the case. I think you and your mom need to try and find a different way because you shouldn't be missing this much class every day. But he never did anything about it. And he was always late. And that's the way it was. And, nowadays it's like, well, you need to be empathetic. You need to be understanding. You really, really need to, don't punish them. And that is what I do. I don't, I just kind of gently suggest we find something else. But if they don't, they don't. My dad would be like, no. You find a way. You be here on time. It's disrespectful to be late to my class. You have a job. It's to be here on time. You wouldn't do this in a job. You should learn your lesson now. And my dad would not tolerate it. It just would not be allowed. If he had to get a counselor involved, he would do it. And so he had like a very different view of things. He had really high expectations. And he didn't apologize for it. And he didn't, even though he was entertaining sometimes, he was not flashy. And he didn't, he thought that education could kind of sell itself. And so, he was a guy who believed that, if you say it's hard, he would say good. Right. It's not supposed to be easy. His view would be that the things in life that are worth doing, like the things that really make life special and joyful and substantive, are things that require your diligence and your time and your dedication and your focus. Teachers who make things easy, nobody remembers their name in the past. Nobody comes back to say, you changed my life. Why? Because you didn't, because everything was easy. You made it hard. You put in hurdles, but you helped me to overcome those hurdles. That's somebody whose life you changed. And I don't remember if I put this in my essay. Maybe I put this in a book at some point, or maybe it was in the essay. But I remember growing up, this is before Facebook or cell phones or anything. I remember we would get around Christmas time, there would always be a knock at a door. And invariably, there would be somebody in their 20s or in their 30s standing there asking for my dad. And my dad would come to the front door and then they would, oh, hey, how are you? And they would talk for like 10 or 15 minutes. And it was a former student from 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And they just wanted to stop by and say to my dad, thank you for being a great teacher. Thank you for changing my life. I don't know if you know you did, but you did. I want you to know that. And we don't do that anymore. We're going to have a whole generation of teachers who were kind of cool, kind of trendy, kind of neat, kind of edgy. But I don't know how much we're changing lives because we're not asking much out of our students. And the other thing is, just like the language. And I know, a lot of the other teachers like, well, that's just how they talk and you have to put up with it. Now, my view of this is that, like, if students aren't being fed at home, we feed them at school, right? Well, if we're not modeling good behavior at home and how to work hard and how to behave and how to treat one another, if we're not doing that at home, then why don't we extend that to school too? Hey, you don't talk like that here. You don't use that language. When I say good morning, you say good morning back. These are empowering habits that young people are going to need. And my father, the first time some kid throws an F-bomb in the hallway, my dad would go apoplectic. He would be like one of those characters in one of the Pixar movies where their head explodes and kind of rage, like, what? He would be utterly shocked. Sometimes you see kids who get their lunches and they throw it against the wall just because they can. You have kids who use really, verbally attack a teacher. They're back in the classroom the next day. He wouldn't make it. He would not be able to function. And that's not even talking, Steve, about all the kind of teaching things. My dad, I was just mentioning this in my class the other day. My dad taught Socratically. So, like, you couldn't hide. He would ask you questions. And if you said something silly or asinine, he would call you on it. He'd be like, why do you think that? Or where are you getting that from? Or that's not true. Nowadays, oh man, you would be written up. You're attacking my child. You're embarrassing my child. You're isolating my child. You're shaming. That's the word. You're shaming my child. My dad he would not do well in 2022. And I wrote that about, I'm glad that you liked that piece. I got a lot of feedback. That piece was part of my grieving process of losing my dad. We're coming up on the anniversary of his death next week. So, I was thinking a lot about my dad, obviously. Then it kind of culminated in that kind of essay, why my dad wouldn't last in a modern classroom. But thank you for that. It meant a lot to me. I put my heart and soul into that essay.
You could really tell, and sorry for the passing of your father. It sounds like he was an awesome teacher and a great parent to have. And it's some of the points that you make, though. I never met your father, but I can tell you that it really tells a tale of what's happened in a lot of schools and such, because you have, especially where, for some reason, and this is sad because you're talking to someone who went to schools to make change. Or as a principal, I marketed myself to do that. And a big part of that was that a lot of times they needed to have some sort of enforcement of what they said. If this is the rule, then it's got to be then there's a reason why it's a rule. So therefore it's going to be enforced, as opposed to the idea of, oh, I guess you'll do better next time. Let's smack you on the wrist and send you on your way back to class, like you said. And, one of the things that, one of the articles that you've written in the Daily Wire is how progressives have ruined school culture and created a mass teacher exodus. And I was wondering if some of this might, if you could talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, first of all, I don't like the title of that. They kind of made that a little, I'm definitely, more conservative than I am liberal, but I'm not a flamethrower. Sometimes my friends over there will, they'll take my article and like make it like it's a real partisan flamethrowing article. But I do believe, though, that, one of the things that has happened is that we've embraced this very therapeutic view of education rather than an academic view of education. And I think that when you look at schools nowadays, and you look at kind of the kind of behavior that we tolerate in young people, at the end of the day, I don't think it's really helping anybody. And I understand why we're doing it. I'm sensitive to it because people who are in special education programs, people who come from poverty, people of color, tend to be disproportionately punished in the last 30 or 40 years. That leads to more suspensions, that leads to less academic performance, and that leads to a kind of inequality. So I understand, I completely am sympathetic to why people think we need to have more of these, what we call restorative practices, restorative justice. Don't be so quick to throw kids out of school. But I do think that the pendulum has gone the opposite direction a little bit. I write about this in Hollowed Out quite a bit, is that, at the end of the day, who you're really hurting are the poor kids who just want to get a good education. 97% of them are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And when you have to stop class and say, okay, this kid is angry, they're lashing out, let's stop the instruction, let's stop the academics, and let's focus the class now on the one person who is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And teachers have reported that these kind of strategies, this kind of environment makes it so you don't have enough learning time. And again, you're focusing the whole thing on the worst behaved student in the classroom to the detriment of the other kids who are trying to use the classroom as a kind of slingshot, maybe out of a life that they want to do better than. And so, I think it really has harmed morale. It has harmed school culture. And I think one of the things is that, culture is so important. Young people call it a vibe, older people call it an ambiance. But I mean, a place that feels empowering, inspiring, like important things are happening here, inspiring things are happening here, and there's a standard that we are going to achieve here. That standard is excellence, it's achievement. You can feel that. And I've felt this in a lot of different places, that in the last 10 years, it's kind of gone from that to, we're going to work on all these other things, these behavioral problems, these norms, and we're going to do it under the banner of compassion, Steve. That's the thing that bothers me, is it's not very compassionate to the people who are behaving. It's not very compassionate to the teachers just trying to do their job. It's not very compassionate even to the students who are not dumb. They know, hey, if I can get away with A, B, and C that I couldn't get away with 5 years ago, I'm going to do it. And here's the thing. What is the truism about bad behavior? If bad behavior is allowed to continue, then it's perpetuated and it continues and it's amplified. And the adults, at some point, have to start adulting. The thing about standards is they have to be articulated and they have to be enforced. And I think one of the problems in our society is that adults are embarrassed about being adults. Because instead of being their parents and their teachers, we've decided to be their friends instead. And friendship is a relationship predicated on equality, not authority. And I want parents and teachers to be authorities in the life of young people. And I can't believe I have to say this right here, but I'm going to say it. Young people actually need to be raised. They don't know how to do it on their own, right? Their value system comes from somewhere. Their behavior comes from somewhere. Their expectations and their hopes and their morality comes from somewhere. And we adults have decided to leave the room. Well, when you have a vacuum in those kinds of behaviors and modeling systems, well, guess what? They become hollowed out. And that's exactly what you're seeing. And it's not the kids. I just want to be very clear. I'm not slamming the kids. It's not their fault. None of us, we don't control the time and place where we're born. We adults are the ones who are to blame because we've decided to be cool instead of authoritative.
That is so powerful. I mean, that's, because that is something that, that's what I see. I mean, when you don't set boundaries and you think that you're going to, whatever the reasoning is, as an adult, you've got to be an adult and someone has to be the adult. And if the adult is not the adult, the kid figures out and they start watching people who, get paid $75 million a year to do something that, is whatever their career field, and they have their own choices. They've been, they don't know what the regular world looks like and feels like and stuff like this, or they get their information from whatever people are sharing, whatever stories they're telling on social media. One of my favorite things on Instagram used to be that people would share all this perfect world stuff. They drive this car, they have this boat, they do, and you're like, yeah, okay, whatever. And you think that this is, even though you don't know this person really, you think this is it. Well, that's where they get their, how to behave and such from, it's from that, when you talk about, it's funny because so much stuff that we've got going on now, you just wonder, a lot about, sometimes is the kid more the adult? Jeremy, this is awesome what you're talking about. And it is so needed, to be able to have these conversations where, in order to kind of return, or at least to make things work where we, work in the classroom, where it doesn't chase teachers off. It doesn't, the understanding of what it requires to be a teacher in the classroom. And you have such poignant articles, and your book's the same. Awesome catching up with you today. And I got to ask you, do you have any new books in the works?
You know what? It's funny you asked. I just signed a contract for a new one, just kind of in the beginning of it. I think it'll be right up your alley. It's actually kind of the opposite of Hollowed Out. Hollowed Out was all about what is it that's making our young people miserable, what's hollowing out their souls. This is going to be a book about essentially patriotic self-help. This idea that there are these extraordinary Americans in our history who have led very meaningful and purposeful and joyful and amazing lives. And they have life lessons to bequeath to us, to kind of bestow to us. And I want to write a book about kind of, what these, I want to pinpoint 12 extraordinary Americans and essentially say, what are 3 life lessons that each of them can give to us today so that we can live better lives? And, it's essentially modeled after kind of the Greek historian Plutarch. Plutarch wrote about, these amazing Greeks and Romans, and our founding fathers loved Plutarch. It's like, oh, well, I want to be like that Roman. I want to be like that Greek. And I want to write a book so that, people can say, well, I want to be like that American. I want to do what they did. I want to know what they know. And so it's kind of the opposite. I'm essentially writing a book of self-help using the greatest Americans who've ever lived as our guides.
That sounds awesome. I can't wait. And you got to shoot me a note as soon as you do, so we can have
I'll talk to you in a year and a half, hopefully. I'm still in the very beginning. So this is the first time I've ever talked about it. So yeah, you'll have to remind me when we get there.
Awesome. I will do that. And best of luck as you work on that, because that is right up my alley. I look forward to reading it. Another thing I got to ask you here real quick is, before we go, if someone wanted to connect further with you, where would you send them? As well as, I know you're a keynote speaker and you do lots of talks and stuff like this. How would they engage you for talking if they wanted to for their organization?
So you can follow me on Twitter at Jeremy Adams 6. At JEREMYADAMS 6. And as far as speaking goes, my professional development publisher is Solution Tree, and just Google Solution Tree Jeremy Adams, and you can find me for any kind of keynote speaking or professional development. I'm doing a fair amount of that. Again, I'm still a full-time teacher, so I have to navigate the two. But please contact me. I love talking to teachers, love speaking, and that's it. So thank you so much for having me on.
Well, it's been cool talking with you, Jeremy, and getting caught up. And I got one last question for you, and it goes like this. If you were to give advice to a new teacher in working with students this school year, what is something you'd make sure you shared?
Keep experimenting. You're going to have a lot of bad days. The kids are trying to be reacclimated to normal. You're trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. Understand that the best teachers fail as much as anybody else does. It's how they react to that failure that makes them great. And that is kind of the spirit of, we're going to keep going. If that didn't work, if A didn't work, we'll do B. If B doesn't work, we'll try C. Make sure you just keep at it. Because you're changing something doesn't mean you're failing at it.
Awesome advice. Jeremy, looking forward to your next article and book. Just want to remind everybody that he writes for Quillette, and I'll put a show notes in the show notes. I'll put links to that, and I'll put information about how you can get in touch with him, as well as links to his 4 books. And everyone, make sure that you get a copy of Hollowed Out. Also want to remind you that before I say this, everyone, make sure that you get a copy of Hollowed Out, A Warning About America's Next Generation. And also remember that Jeremy's now a writer for thedailywire.com as well. So we'll put links for those articles there. Jeremy, awesome catching up. Wishing you the best in all that you do.
Thank you so much. We'll talk to you again.
Hey, you have been listening to Teaching, Learning, Leading K12, a podcast to help you help kids achieve their dreams. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 is a member of the Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators, podcasts by educators. Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 is a member of the podcast network based in Canada called Voice Ed Radio. Voice Ed Radio, your voice is right here. The opinions expressed on Teaching, Learning, Leading K12 are those of the guests and host. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is intended to share ideas, advice, and suggestions. Teaching Learning Leading K12 is produced for educational purposes. Hey, thanks for listening. It would be awesome if you visited my website at stephenmiletto.com and connected with me, left a review, and listened to more episodes. And by the way, you could also share it with your friends, with your family, and your colleagues. Thanks so much. You're awesome.